Hello, welcome to another edition of Tod Talks. In a previous edition, we went through the Allied system and took apart the Allied air handler and briefly went over how to swap the coil from horizontal right to horizontal left. There were a lot of inquiries about more detail on how to do that. So today we're going to create a video where we're going to go step by step on how to remove the evaporator coil, swap it from horizontal right to horizontal left, put it back in the air handler, so you can see everything that we're talking about. Now, everything that we're going to discuss today is found inside the installation manual, and it's also printed on top of the evaporator coil, which I'll show you once we get into the system. Okay, so let's get started. First thing we need to do is remove our panels. They're all 1/4 inch screws and they're all the same size. This screw right here, you don't need to remove, you can just loosen it and the panel will come right off. Now you can see inside the air handler, as we showed on our last video, they have this here for protection to keep the blower wheel steady during shipment. Go ahead and remove that. Then we're going to remove this lower panel. Okay, now our lower panel is free. You'll also notice that I removed this screw here, which you'll need to remove in order to pull that out. On some of the units, you may be able to slide the evaporator coil out without moving this bar, but most likely you're going to have to remove this bar because of the height of the horizontal drain pan. Now, as you can see from the factory, this unit comes set up for horizontal right application. But on horizontal left, there's some modifications that need to be made. Okay, so first we're going to go ahead and remove this bar. And then we're going to remove the filter access core down here at the bottom. These are 2 thumb screws to remove this. We'll slide that out a bit. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to be able to remove the evaporator coil. So we'll slide the coil out, set it down here on the ground. Now, the first thing you notice is the pan's kind of wobbly because it's actually held in place more once you slide it inside. The easiest thing on removing this pan, it's really, really simple. Lift that out, pan pops off. Okay, it doesn't get much harder than that. As I stated before, can you get a shot of the top of that? These are your complete instructions on how to field modify this coil from horizontal right to horizontal left. It takes you right through 10 steps. We're going to go through those 10 steps and put it back together. Vertical, horizontal, left. Okay. So the first thing we need to do, well, let me do this. Let me flip this up and show you actually what we're doing. Get a shot of the inside of that coil. You'll see there's a horizontal, actually a small little drain pan in here. So what happens when it's in a horizontal application, water can run down and accumulate down here. And instead of that dripping and hitting the coil below it and putting too much of a moisture load on the coil where it drips through and falls into the cabinet, this pan directs it over into the edge of the coil, which gets it down into the drain pan. So if we don't flip that around, then the water is just going to hit the back of that drain pan, drip off, drip into a lower part of the coil, and go into your air handler. So that's what we're going to do to swap that around. And while we're in here, one of the steps is removing this little black plug. and putting that black plug on the other side. So I find it's easiest to do that before you start the rest of the process. Because once you take this out, you're exposing the top of the coil and the top of the pan. So this is a good protective device to have on here. So what I'll do is flip this over, grab a small pair of pliers and a screwdriver, and just kind of push that plug in a little bit to where I can grab it with my pliers and work and wiggle it a little bit. It takes a little bit of finagling. And there the plug is removed. Okay, so as you can see, what's probably going to happen to you more than once out in the field, while I was removing that plug, I lost it. It went somewhere. It's a small enough plug. I don't really think it's going to matter. Okay, but ideally you want to remove that small plastic plug and it would go into the other side in a further step. And we'll get to that in just a second. So now that you've removed that plug and hopefully not lost it like I did, we're going to flip this back over and we're going to start the process of removing this coil, okay, or flipping this coil. So first thing, we've got 8 screws across the top here. We're going to remove all 8 screws. Now, one quick note, if you are keeping these screws in the same spot you're keeping the rest of your screws, note that these are different size screws than what we use to remove the panels with. Okay, these screws are a longer, different type of screws, so make sure you keep these separate from the screws that you're going to be using to put the air handler back together. Okay, so once we've removed those screws, this top panel just lifts off of here. Okay. And something you're going to want to pay attention to when you're putting it back. Here, if you can zoom in here a little bit. We certainly don't want you screwing back into the coil. So be real careful when you're putting that top plate back on that you're screwing back into these screw holes that are specific to those longer screws. Okay. So now that we've removed the top plate, this hole, when we remove the plug, there's a hole just like it on the back side of the coil that has a screw in it that I'm going to remove right now. Okay, and also you'll note that that is a machine threaded bolt more so than a screw. Okay, and that's specific to this pan. So when we can remove the pan that was inside the coil. The screw that we just took out is a screw that goes into here to hold the pan into place. Okay, so we've taken this pan out. You can see the way it's set up. If you laid it down horizontal left as it comes from the factory, water's going to drip into this pan and then go down into the drain. Okay, so since we're going to lay it down horizontal right, we need to flip this pan around. So we're going to flip this pan around, insert it back in. We're going to take that screw that we just removed from that pan, and you want to line it up. If you look in there, you'll be able to see the hole inside that. And you want to line that up. With that hole. Okay, now you've got that pan securely held into place. Now we're going to put our drip pan back on. Now it's important when you're putting the drip pan back on that you flip the drip pan as well. If you'll notice on the edge of this pan, you have a side that has a 90-degree angle and you have a side that has a 45-degree angle. The 90-degree angle needs to be towards the bottom of your air handler when you lay it down in the horizontal position. So when we took the pan off, it was in this position because we were going horizontal right. So now we need to flip that pan around because we're going to be going horizontal left. And you want that drip edge, that 90-degree drip edge on the bottom side of the coil when it's in the horizontal position. Okay, so now we're going to simply fasten that pan back together using the longer screws. Typically what I'll do is go ahead and put the screw through the hole, line it up with one of the first screw holes to make sure I don't hit that evaporator coil. And I suggest you don't tighten those down right away until you get a couple of them started. Typically, once you get a couple of them started, the rest of them are all lined up and it's real easy to put the screws into. So I've gone ahead and started that one over there. And I typically will come over here and start this one. Just make sure I've got it lined up. Okay, and now the rest of these should go right into place fairly quick. Okay, tighten that last one up. So there you're all set. You notice we got the 45-degree edge on that side, the 90-degree edge on that side. Now the plug that we removed from here, ideally you would flip it around, pop it back in the hole where you removed the screw, unless you did like I did and lost the plug. You could probably just put a little bit of caulk over that or something if you wanted to block that hole. Don't know that it's going to make a whole lot of difference. Then your horizontal pan, of course, where we took it off the other side, we're simply going to slide it back onto this side. Okay, now we have our pan on. It's going to slide right into these rails. And there we've got our coil. Okay. So one thing to note, when you're sliding this back in, there's a notch here. Okay, that notch needs to rest on top, I believe. Let's try that again. There we go. In a little bit. Okay. And then we put the coil door back on and you're set to go. Now, if you come across an air handler where this has not been done in the field properly, the easiest way to identify that is this 90-degree bend would be on the wrong side. And if you see that little black plug there, you'll know that that little black plug was never removed. So chances are the pan that was inside here is not going to be in the correct direction. You'll also note, you can look at the sticker on top. If you look at the sticker on top, if it's not reading towards the bottom like this is now, then you'll see that this hasn't been swapped properly. So that's it in a nutshell. We'll put this, take it out, swap it around and put it back together. But I just wanted to identify that these are the steps that need to be taken if you're going to swap this from horizontal right to horizontal left. If you don't do that in the field, you're going to end up with excess water, possibly inside the air handler, which can lead to sweating when you're in an unconditioned space. And there's our plug. Okay, so at the end of the show, here's our plug. We found it. We'll put it back in when we swap this back around. Okay, that's going to wrap up this Tod Talk. Hopefully you got some benefit out of this, and look forward to sharing more of these with you. If you got any questions, reach out to your HVAC consultant or anybody at Tropic Supply, and we'll be able to help you out with this. Thank you and have a good day.